service conference. We were at the conference and we're sitting in the risers, there, if any of you've been, there's, these kind of like stands. And then we had this kind of exercise. We were like kind of interviewing each other. And she was sitting down in front of me. She turns around and says, "Hey, you want to do this with me?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, okay, cool." So that's how I first met Wilvena, was doing service in Narcotics Anonymous in California. And she's traveled down here tonight from the Bronx, New York. And I've gotten to know her a bit over the years. We've stayed in touch. And what I can tell you is that she is very serious about service in Narcotics Anonymous. And I know, service saves lives. And people who are dedicated to that are doing the serious work of Narcotics Anonymous. And I that's one of the things about her that I admire. And I was really hoping, we tried to get her down here last fall, but she had another service commitment, so she couldn't be here. And but we got her here this spring, and I'm really grateful that she came. And I know you guys are going to really get something out of this, because when I've heard her speak, it's been like, we need to hear her. So with that, I give you Wilvena G.
Hi, everybody. Hi. My name's Wilvena, and I'm an addict. And I want to thank the Mountaineer Region Convention Committee for having me come down here tonight. It's a lot of work putting conventions on. And I want to just say that I am a 3-time winner in Narcotics Anonymous. And what does that mean? That means my clean date changed 3 times in here. So I want to welcome any member in here. We had members, I guess, I was here for the Clean Time Countdown. Amazing, awesome energy in here. So we've got members ranging from 40 years clean all the way down to a couple of days. And I was actually really fortunate to talk to a couple of newcomers tonight. I want to give a shout out to Brittany with 24 days clean here in this meeting. And I want to acknowledge Aaron. I see he's got his key tags on. He has his 90-day key tag. Got up here. He had no problem sounding out anonymity, got through, autonomous. That's what we love in here. So today I have 21 years, 7 months, and 8 days clean. And I'm originally from the class of 1986, just so you know. So a little bit about me. I grew up on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And for those of you that are not familiar with that area, it borders Central Park on 59th Street. It goes all the way to Riverside Drive. I lived on West End Avenue. I could see the Hudson River from my bedroom. And for those of you that also don't know, the Upper West Side is full of blacks, Jews, and gays. And more Jews. It's a liberal neighborhood, also full of Puerto Ricans, housing projects, but we also have Lincoln Center there, and we've got the Dakota, where some people that you may know have lived. But those of you also might be familiar with the movie Panic in Needle Park. And if you've never seen it, with Al Pacino, they have some seedy-ass SRO hotels over there. And my experience doing drugs in the late 80s and 90s was running all over these SRO hotels. And I qualify to be here because I suffered over 25 cocaine-related seizures smoking crack. And I need to say that because I need to remind myself of that. And We are all survivors of a near-fatal catastrophe in here, right? So, my family of origin, I'm the oldest of two. I come from a professional family. Both my parents were doctors, but both my parents were addicts. My mother was a prescription drug addict. She was also a rage addict. She was a work addict. And my mom was a clinical psychotherapist. Emphasis on the psycho, because that bitch was crazy. All right? She used to beat me with all kind of objects, paddles, dog leashes, and I never knew who was coming home through that door. Was it going to be the mother who was happy to see me after some long trip that she went on? Or was it going to be the mother emerging from the bathroom, beating my ass and calling me names? So I grew up in a household of confusion and contradiction. In addition to that, my dad, he worked for a government agency. He also had his PhD, but my dad was a closeted homosexual. And when I was little, he used to put me on his lap and go cruising in the car. And he would pick up guys out on the road, and I'd say, Dad, do you know that guy? And he'd say, oh, yeah, I know that guy. And guess what? I knew he didn't know that guy. My dad would also bring home guys that, would do crazy, outrageous things to a 5-year-old girl, like put me on their lap with an erection and then go off into the bathroom. And so there was a lot of real question marks in my mind. I also grew up in a household where my parents were two radically different complexions. My father was a white-looking black man with blue eyes and straight hair, and my mother was like the color of coffee. And so I wasn't even sure in my own household what was happening there racially. It took me years to understand it, and I finally just told people, well, I'm born with a suntan. That was the best explanation I could come up with. So, my brother was the golden child of the family. I was the scapegoat of the family. I was the mother's scapegoat. And for those people that are confused about the job of the scapegoat has a very specific job in the family. The job of the scapegoat is to hold the mirror up to the family and say, there's something wrong going on here. There's something wrong. And the family turns around and says, there's nothing wrong with us. There's something wrong with you. And so I spent most of my life from the age of 10 getting punished, getting beat, talked down to. And my response to that was anger and resentment and acting out. So I thought my job was to make sure that I got in trouble because negative attention is better than no attention, right? And I was also of the belief that I was worth less than my mother's time. She would come home and tell me, well, I have 20 minutes of quality time for you. And I didn't feel worthy. I felt less than her time. I felt like, I was the weirdo of the family. So in that scenario, I started using drugs at the age of 12 to block all of that out, to freeze those feelings and block them out. And I was lucky, in my opinion, that my brother was the golden child because he was the buffer. He was the buffer for all of my fucked up behavior. He was the one that would, come to me and say, don't worry, sis, I'll talk her out of it. He was also like the little mascot. He was the only one that could make my mother laugh. So that was the dynamics of my household. And I just thought that was my job, that I was a fucked up, worthless person that could never do anything right. And that was propelled through my drug use. So my brother was my first running buddy, getting high. And you know what? Listen, I'm not going to lie. I started getting him high. Why? Because I was bringing boys up to the house. And I didn't want him to tell on me. Right? So he stopped thinking about all of that when we started smoking weed. Right? He forgot all about it. And also, now I have something on him. So that was how that worked, that manipulation that started early. So, I know that in my addiction, the other issue was I was a daddy's girl. So part of being a daddy's girl meant that I had some unrealistic expectations about relationships. What did that mean? I need to have gifts and prizes, right? I need to be pampered. I have no boundaries. I'm a little princess. And that created a bunch of issues for me in my relationships that I had to sort out through step work. So, what propelled my addiction within a year of each other, my father and brother died within a year. My brother died in a tragic accident the one night that I couldn't go out, and we used to go out together all the time. My brother was also the popular kid in the neighborhood, and I was kind of just his sister. Everyone loved my brother. And he went out without me one night, and he was playing tag in one of those SRO hotel room roofs. And he fell to his death 13 stories in a house that was literally up the block from where we lived. And I remember the night that the police came to the house. I actually had the flu. And when they knocked on the door, and my mother and I went down to the morgue, and we saw his sneaker on the floor of the emergency room and the sheet over his body, I said to myself, no God would do this. No God would leave me here with this woman by myself, right? Within the next year, my father came to visit me for the weekend up at college. And when he went home, he picked up a guy from a bar and he was stabbed over 90 times and he was murdered. And I felt that I was alone, that I was abandoned by my higher power, and I needed to be able to freeze my feelings. And I remember, the only solution that I had was to use drugs. For me, that was the solution. And the progression of that, journey through drug use took me to street homelessness, took me to, what we used to call in Manhattan gangs get high, when you used to dip into a doorway or a public bathroom and smoke crack and break out, right? And I remember the first seizure that I had because I just thought I was being greedy, right? I just thought that, it's because I was up for 4 days. That's why I had that seizure, right? It's because I haven't eaten for probably like a week, right? Couldn't be the drugs. Couldn't be that. So the seizure that took me into recovery, I woke up in one of those SRO hotels, and I had shit and piss all over myself from a seizure. The guy that I met who looked like Quasimodo the night before had flat left me there. And I realized I was going to be a Jane Doe with a toe tag if I didn't do something extreme like take a break, right? Like I just need a break, right? And so when I walked myself to the detox and I caught a look at myself in that plate glass window, and I was like, who is that skinny bitch? And it was me, and my ass cheeks were clapping together. I had my little 1-inch stem in my sock, right? And when I got up there to the detox, how dare they throw away my little 1-inch stem? I was mad. I really didn't understand what was happening. But when Narcotics Anonymous came in there, I realized I didn't know anyone that didn't do drugs. My whole years of high school, everyone I knew used drugs. Everyone I knew, that was the solution, and I didn't understand what they were talking about when they said happy, joyous, and free. But the thing I did understand was that They said they weren't getting paid to come up there. They said this was a form of service. They said that doing service got them out of themselves, and that, they felt good about that, and that, I saw that the woman looked like she was reasonably happy, and I never forgot that. And she said that the first thing I needed to do was to go to a Narcotics Anonymous meeting when I got out. So I was able to do that. The only problem was that the guy who was in rehab 2 weeks before was the one who came to pick me up to take me to my first meeting, and that's how I ended up in the borough of Brooklyn. And the truth of the matter is that I wasn't, I was asked to remove myself from my place of residence, for those who understand that reference. That request came from my mom. So ultimately, I'm going to talk to you guys about my step work journey in Narcotics Anonymous, because my step work journey is what ultimately kept me here. Because there were a lot of things that I didn't understand about this program. And when I came into this program, I had also sat in a couple of seats of higher learning. So I was that smart addict in the room, right, that was too freaking smart for herself. But I did realize that as many seats of higher learning as I sat, I didn't know how to stay clean. I didn't know how to do it. So I had a lot of resistance to the step work at first. I remember when I read the basic text, and I was like, well, this isn't too complicated. I could read this in an hour, right? I don't understand what the big deal is. But what I did recognize was that the basic text is our instruction manual to how to stay clean. And then for me, because I'm also that addict, and probably none of you in here, that followed the cute guys to the home group meetings, right? So the guy who I thought was really cute, he was chairing a basic text book study meeting, right? So I got to listen to all 10 chapters of the basic text while I was staring at this guy during the meeting, right? But because, you know what, I will tell you this, for those of you who got the basic text tonight for the first time, I'm going to tell you something right now. That book is poetry. There are things from that book, and I have some favorite lines in that book that I got from that meeting that I was able to internalize, because that book was written by us and for us. We are the fellowship in the world that has the best literature. And yeah, please clap for that. So, one of the things that I realized about the first step, and it's something that really made the difference for me, was understanding, it talks about in the step working guide, the difference between resignation and surrender, right? Resignation means that, okay, I know I'm an addict. I got a problem. Like, I got to come to these meetings, like with all these other addicts, and maybe one day I can use again. Maybe one day I could have a drink. Surrender for this addict meant using is off the table. It's not an option anymore. That's not an option to survive my emotions, right? That if I truly surrender, I've taken using off the table. And I've recognized that when I feel some uncomfortable feelings, and it says it in the chapter where it talks about holding on with grim and obstinate determination until a crisis passes. I could hold on, and I remember my crisis used to be, well, my dealer's not answering. I'll just call another one. He's not freaking answering. This is a crisis, right? Well, the crisis of holding on also means I can keep calling the next addict. I can go to the meeting. I can say I want to use. And I'm going to also tell you that, people with 21 years clean, there's sometimes we want to freaking use. And I got no problem saying I want to use. The thought checks in. And the thing that I also recognize from the first step is unmanageability. Now, in the very beginning, inner unmanageability meant to me that I was just a volcano of emotions. You said some shit to me, you stepped on my toe, right? Like I got a parking ticket, it meant that my emotions, I was hypersensitive. I didn't like what you said to me. My sponsor told me I needed to do something. Now I'm angry and resentful. That's the inner unmanageability I had when I had like 90 days clean. But now, what I recognize about my inner unmanageability, I have some untrue beliefs that I still tell myself. I'm never going to get into a permanent relationship. My relationships have a time limit. My attractiveness is on a time limit. My personality can't be tolerated, by a normal guy because I'm like too intense. I do too much service, right? That's part of like my inner unmanageability that I tell myself. And I remember when I was 17 years old on my 17th birthday, and I said, well, it's all downhill from here. This is the best I'm ever going to look. Right? So, that part of unmanageability, there's no expiration date on that for this addict. And I need my sponsor to help me to keep unraveling these things that I say to myself that are untrue. And that brings me to the second step. It wasn't until this round of step work, and I've done 3 rounds of step work. And I know that this last time that my clean date changed was really the time when I got the understanding that my higher power had interrupted my death. If you're sitting here and you're new and you just come back from a relapse, you are very welcome because your higher power interrupted your death. Yes. And you're here for a reason. So I really needed to understand that my higher power was not only always working in my life, but that I needed to be able to reach out to my higher power in those times. I needed to. So, for example, I'm also a survivor of domestic violence. My youngest son's father, had at one point a couple years clean, and when he relapsed, he was extremely violent. And for anybody that knows what the domestic violence mantra is, it's like cut off all contact with everyone and isolate you because it's easier to control and like time abuse and make sure what where you are and what you're doing. And I was left at that moment with my higher power. That was the only thing that I had to rely on. And that was like at 10 years clean when this had happened to me. And I believe that my higher power helped me to get me and my 3 sons out of that situation. We went to a domestic violence shelter and we were able to come back and repair, the relationships that my sons had witnessed. Me being hit, things broken, threats as their voices got deeper. My oldest son in particular, he was told that he was going to break his arm if he intervened. So I had a lot of reparation to do. So the second step, restoration of sanity, really means that I need to refrain from placing myself in degrading situations. And when my sponsor really explained it to me in that way, that I can actually, and I've been in enough degrading situations as an active woman addict, and so we know what that means. And so I can actually take a look at before I place myself, and I can get restored. So, Step 3 for me is probably the step I use every single day, because step 3 is like my anxiety buster. It's one of my most important tools in my toolkit. Why? Because step 3 reminds me that I have the bracket of 24 hours to do my footwork. Anything that I can do, I need to just do it. And then I need to let my higher power do the rest. You know, my sponsor also tells me, don't try to do God's job. Why are you doing God's job? Just do your job. Do the thing that you could do that day, and the next day you could do something else. Right? And so when I've done everything that I need to do, whether it's, if I can't pay a bill, and this was like a, news flash for me. My sponsor was like, well, call the bill company and tell them you'll pay next month. Like, instead of being that addict that runs away from all responsibility, that's my footwork. That there's always an answer, that I can ask for help, right? And that it's just for today. So, the other thing about the transition from step 3 to step 4 is it gives me the courage to look at myself. There's a lot of shame and guilt. That women, mothers, partners, we're given a lot of messages as women growing up. That if our relationships fail, we're worthless, right? We can't get another man because now we're like tainted, right? Now I'm also the one who has the dubious distinction. I have 3 sons' fathers, right? So I have like the trifecta, but I'm an optimist, right? I'm an optimist. So, but here's the reality. I had a lot of explaining to do. When those sons got to be a certain age, I knew I had a lot of explaining, because they were also the sons I took to the meetings and were playing with the key tags and the IPs, right? I had to be able to explain to them why mommy's saying she's an addict. They're asking me, what drugs did I do, right? They're asking me, about the 3 different last names that they have, right? So I needed step work for that. I needed to take a look at my 4th step so I could break the chains of addiction, so that my sons don't have to have walls that are rigid, so they don't have to hide behind false narratives and lies, right? So that I could explain to them in an appropriate way, why mommy still makes those meetings. And the truth of the matter is that, my sons are actually full participants in Narcotics Anonymous. They do service with mommy. They show up to the poster drives and they do the table sittings. And step 4, it was really the first time that I could fully release resentment, anger, and fear, so that I wouldn't be stuck in the triangle, right? That I wouldn't constantly be replaying what I thought was a victim role in my life. It released me from being a victim. So for me, I could examine my part. I could examine my self-centered setup in my life in the 4th step. So my examinations, actually this 3rd time around that I did the step work, I actually took a closer look at the moral inventory part, because I had passed that over with a minimum of concern. And what I realized was that there were certain things that I thought were really super important. Academic excellence, right? Not making a mistake. And I put less emphasis on just being kind. Not saying the most fucked up thing that I could say off the top of my head to somebody, right? And I remember wanting to let my sons know that those things were more important, because I grew up in a household where my mother was a super achiever, and if I didn't get 100 on a test, right, and I got 98, she's asking me what are the other 2 points, right? So I needed to let my sons know that's not the most important thing about being a human in this world. The most important thing is that you hold the elevator when your neighbor is going to come, and you don't let it slam in their face and start laughing, right? So, the other portion of examining my resentments, and it talks about it in the step working guide. It says, how has my willingness to not experience certain feelings contributed to my resentments? Because I was hurt. I was a hurt little girl. So I'm going to get you, Mom. You don't like me, I'm going to get you. I don't want to feel the fact that, like, my mom doesn't want to spend any time with me. I never did any of those mommy-daughter lunches or dates. None of that was happening. You know, and my real feeling was, this bitch hates my guts and she wants me gone. And then the other question, how does my behavior contribute to my resentments? Well, it finally dawned on me, not only was I a bad little girl, but I did things to embarrass my mother on purpose. I wanted to get her. And when I recognized that that was the exact nature, something shifted in the way I was responding to her. And I also recognized I don't want my sons to treat me like that. I don't want my sons to do that. And as my mother started getting older, our relationship, I'm not going to stand up here and tell you our relationship went through a metamorphosis and a transformation, because my mother was still a bitch. And she took every opportunity she could to say something critical. Now, I also recognize that she came from a generation where that, I think, women and mothers at that time felt that that's how they were supposed to prepare you for the world, right? They were supposed to, tell you, well, you're too fat, and the way that you are raising your son is not appropriate, and I don't like, I guess I just heard everything negative. But what I recognized as she got older was, if I don't bring my kids to see my mom, they're not going to bring their kids to see me. What message am I showing them? That grandma doesn't mean anything? Is that the message that I want to give them? Don't ever show up to grandma? So that was a big part of my step work story, is recognizing that, those resentments have a connection to my behavior. And even if my mother never changes, I need to change. I need to change the way I respond to her, because that's the principle. That's the principle. And that, you know what, at 90 years old, she wasn't going to change. She wasn't going to change. So, part of my fifth step, exact nature, was being able to resolve that for myself and to take a look at, the fifth step allows me to get a level of deep self-acceptance. So for me to get that, I also have to recognize I'm not perfect. And I grew up with a mother that literally said, I don't make mistakes. How do you deal with that? Right? How do you deal with a mom that tells you that she's perfect? So recognizing that I'm human was a big part of being able to accept myself. And also to be able to say to my sons, you know what? I was wrong. I made a mistake. Mommy doesn't know everything. I'm going to find out. So, the other part that really helped me in my exact nature moments, and I got to be honest with you, you guys have some amazing audience participation here. I've actually never heard some of the rejoinders that you guys were saying, especially about service. And I know service is like a mirror to our defects. I just never heard about the way you guys put it with the pointing out being an asshole part. But what I recognized from the exact nature moment to me was that exact nature at the dinner table where my mother told me, you can't talk today, you were bad. And so my defect started from there, the arguing defect, right? The know-it-all defect, the back talk defect, the correcting defect. I just did it to other people. And what I recognized when I got to service is that I was harming the newcomer when I'm arguing at the business meeting. You know, my meeting in Brooklyn, where I first got clean, is Midday Miracles. It's the 12 in the afternoon. They have two meetings, 10 and 12, and that was the emergency room of NA. And there was a lot of wild sharing from the floor that, like, I like to call shotgun sharing, because that means you can just blast anybody. Oh, you didn't pay me back the money you owe me. You're sleeping with my girl. You know, you're selling pills at the meeting. This is what people are saying from the floor, right? So that's not principles before personalities. That's carrying the mess, not the message. But what I recognized was, as a trusted servant, when I'm arguing with people at the meeting, I'm raising my hand and saying I don't like the policy, I'm harming people in the meeting. Why? Because Narcotics Anonymous is supposed to show people that this isn't the street. We're not supposed to treat people like on the street corner. Like when we have it here, we're trusted servants. We're trusted to be able to conduct ourselves with, love, and to be able to tell people something, because if we were elected to a position, we have to be trusted to be kind. We have to be trusted to be understanding. We have to be trusted not to be sarcastic when someone asks the same question 50 times at the area meeting, right? Because we want to, it's going to save our lives to keep these doors open, right? So I recognize that those defects were not serving me anymore. And when I actually chose the sponsor I have now, I heard her raise her hand and say, I was the chair of Staten Island area 3 terms in a row. And I was like, I want what she has. I wanted to be able to do service. I had seen other women that chaired meetings, and I was like, they're not losing their cool. People are respecting them. They're able to lead. They're able to get these blue-collar workers to, sit down and respond appropriately, right? She's able to encourage people to do service. I want to do that. So the 7-step application for that, for me, every time I came to the area meeting, and listen, we all know what happens. At least it happened in Brooklyn. People throwing chairs, right? Sponsors and sponsees fighting in the middle of the area meeting. Some drunk guy is trying to accost a woman in the meeting, right? So what I needed to be able to do to apply a 7-step was to ask my higher power before I got to the service meeting, please help me arrest my defects, right? And I had to do the same thing when I went to see my mother. Because when I would be going upstairs in that elevator, I would ask my higher power, please give me a humble posture in front of this woman. Because she's 90 years old, right? It's not my job to go there and argue with her. Please help me, show her the respect I was never able to show her, my whole life. And let me make sure that my sons are able to do it. So, if you're new, and I held on to this when I would go to the STEP meetings. My home groups now are the Hell's Kitchen STEP meeting. It's on Saturday night in Manhattan. It's Manhattan's oldest STEP meeting. And I have a virtual STEP meeting that I go to on Wednesday nights. It's out of New Jersey. It's a Recovery in All Seasons STEP meeting where they read out of the STEP working guide. But the point is that when I was new and I gave myself the assignment to go to STEP meetings, when they got to the 8th and 9th step, I said to myself, here's how I can make an amends to myself by not putting poison in my body anymore. I had stopped smoking when I had 90 days clean. Now, all right, I'm not going to lie. Mostly I did it to avoid wrinkles. But I also realized I couldn't blow out a candle on a birthday cake. My oldest son is actually the one who's always like needling me in a joking way, but asking me, Mom, like, how come you can't blow candles out, right? And I mean, what am I going to say? I smoke too much crack? Sorry. So, but yeah, I can make amends to myself by at least trying not to put poison in my body. And, I slowly detoxed off the sugar. I don't eat cake. I don't eat donuts. I ate like the crust off the pie in the other room. But, I really feel like the A step, too, is where I get to take a look at my resentment list and realize that every single person on the resentment list is owed an amends, right? My 3 sons' fathers, I didn't really want to deal with that one. But here's the thing about like step work in the A step, I put them on. I did something fucked up, I had to take them back off, right? Or they did something fucked up, I owe them an amends again. And then the other thing about the list, especially if you do service, there's a lot of harm that I caused clean in the service setting, right? Unwittingly, unintentional harm, self-centered harm, those kinds of things. But the other, making amends to my sons, one of the things that I did, especially after the domestic violence, we started to have family meetings in my house. And what I mean by family meetings is, now, they didn't allow me to call them business meetings, right? But it started where they were all leaving their towels, their wet towels on the floor. And I was like, you know what, I'm not your slave. I'm not freaking picking up these towels. We need to have a meeting about this. And so what happened was I made my sons the chair people, and we rotated the chair. And we kept a book. And we started to like build an agenda. And so when it came to Thanksgiving, anybody that has sons in their house, they know that Thanksgiving dinner is done in 10 minutes, right? But how long are you cooking? Hours and hours, right? So we started by building the list, who's cooking what for Thanksgiving. I'm not cooking everything. So one son was on corn muffins, right? The other one was on he could tear the collard greens, right? So we all started to kind of recognize that we were a team in the house. And eventually, I started traveling with my sons. And I took them to their first overseas trip. I went to the London Convention. And when I took my sons to the London Convention, we built an agenda. What do you guys want to do when we go to London? Now, Mommy has to go to the convention, right? And Mommy has to be there for a certain number of hours. But they built the activities. And so we were able to act in unanimity. They talk about that in our concepts. Acting in, when you're able to all agree on a decision, then there's no conflict. And my sons being able to rotate those positions, they actually made some rules. Mommy can't be on her phone because I'd be on Facebook. I'd be looking at my phone. Mommy, you can't be on the phone during the family meeting, right? And my youngest son turns out to be the best chairperson because he could tell my oldest son, you're out of order. You're not supposed to make fun of your brother. It's not your turn to speak, right? So, part of the family meetings, and we had the book, and we coordinated our calendars for all the holidays so everybody knew what was happening. And I feel like, if I step off this planet tomorrow, my sons know how to make decisions. They know how to cook. They know how to work things out without me. And it's because of Narcotics Anonymous service, right? And they understand how important that is. So, the other piece about step 9 has to do with self-forgiveness first and foremost. Because I wasn't able to forgive anybody. I definitely wasn't able to forgive my mother until I recognized that I needed to forgive myself for being that fucked up little girl that was constantly trying to get her. And that I wasn't perfect. And that maybe I needed to take her off the hook because this was the only way she knew how to raise me. and that she probably experienced some things that were a lot worse in her life. If she's beating me, she probably got beat a lot worse than I did. So I was able to understand how forgiveness and living amends were supposed to work, you know. And I guess that, you know, the admitting being wrong and doing a continuous personal inventory, I like to feel like every time I talk to my sponsor, I'm doing a continuous inventory. And my sponsor doesn't let me off the hook. My sponsor calls me on things when because she knows me. You know, she's not going to, you know, one of our last conversations, we had a service meeting in my zone, and there were a couple of people who like yelled at me in the zone. Now I don't respond, but I'm complaining to her, and she's like, "Well, Vina, you know what? There are difficult people everywhere you go. You're going to have to deal with it. And what is it that you're doing that's like, why are you so surprised at this? You know, where are you in your inventory process? You know, people at my job, you know, whatever it is, that I have to recognize how to respond, you know, in such a way, because, you know, difficult people are not just in Narcotics Anonymous service meetings, right? So, you know, I'm winding down, like with, you know, the 11th step. And I mean, my spiritual path is a very personal one. I love my higher power. I feel like my higher power, you know, not only saved me, but was able to, you know, bless me with these 3 sons. And, you know, I'm just going to talk about my 3 sons for a minute. You know, my oldest son drove down here with me, and my oldest son is on the autism spectrum. He was diagnosed when he was like 6. And I remember the shame and guilt that I felt going to all those IEP meetings, those counseling, the special ed, having to figure out if I'm going to put him on medication, you know, putting him on medication for a brief time, because I said, you know what, if this kid doesn't learn how to read, he's not going to be able to function, you know, and I have to like accept, you know, help. And I needed to be able to share about that in meetings, because I felt like a failure as a mom, you know. And next weekend he graduates from Brooklyn College. You know? So yeah, he's a film major. He loves anime. He's still a really weird little kid that I love. You know, while he was here, he went to the Moth Museum by himself, and, you know, I've been to anime conferences with him, and I'm like, wow, these are his people. But, you know, but I love that kid dearly, and he's actually moving out, like, next month, and I'm, like, crying, because I've watched over 1,000 episodes of One Piece. So, you know, my middle son, you know, got the overachiever, you know, message from me, and he is a junior in Caltech. He's a physics major, but he also he came out to me as LGBT when he was 16 years old. Surprise, surprise. But it was a surprise, because my son is very straight presenting, you know. And I remember when he turned 7, this like cloud kind of came over him of sadness, and I didn't understand what happened to that carefree little boy. And I remember when he told me, and I was like, well, you don't really seem happy, joyous, and free right now. And, you know, they have a gay men's center in New York City, and I took him down there, you know, to do some intake and talk to those people. And we went to like the voguing like competition that they have for the young people. And there were some kids there that kind of like looked like him, and I really saw him like smile for the first time. And it was kind of like some of the clean time smiles that I saw tonight. There's not like a clean time smile, but there's also nothing like the smile of someone that's found their tribe, right? Like we do here, you know? And being a mother of a gay son, He actually informed me that he only watches shows with gay characters, so I watch all of those as well, right? And we go to all the balls in New York, and it's really great because I learned a lot of drag tips from there. So, my youngest son, both my younger sons have Jewish dads. They were both bar mitzvahed. They went to Israel last year on birthright. And my youngest son is militantly Jewish, and he describes himself as bluish, black and Jewish, right? And he is like very militant with it, to the point where like he's wearing his star out there. And there's a lot of anti-Semitism in New York right now. It's actually kind of scary. People are confronting people on the street and everything else. But you know what? My son has a higher power. They both have higher powers. It's actually something that. A lot of times I look at those kids and I'm like, who are you? Why are you going to bed at 10 o'clock? It's really, I feel like incredibly blessed that, Narcotics Anonymous has helped me to explain to these kids that, you have different dads, but it's important that you all esteem your fathers. Not to be the mom that is saying things that are bad, because every son deserves to esteem their dad. And it's abusive for me to say things because I chose their fathers. Not only did I choose them, their fathers have amazing characteristics. That's why I was with them to begin with. So when I talk to my sons about their dads, I tell them how amazing their dads are, why I chose them, what was so great about them. On the way down here, I'm listening to my playlist, and, James Brown is on the playlist, and I told my son, I saw James Brown with your dad at the Palladium in New York, we saw him there. So it's my job to make them feel really good about the men that I chose, because that's how they're going to have a positive imprinting about being men of substance, and being proud and not fracturing off someone because mommy's mad, So I'm going to end it up with the 12-step and just say that, to me, the 12-step means that, and I do a lot of international travel, and I mostly go to NA conventions, and so part of my carrying the message, I was in Indonesia the end of March because I went to the Asia Pacific Forum. So whenever I'm in a cab, actually, and they're like, "Oh, so you're here from America? Why are you here?" Well, I'm going to a Narcotics Anonymous convention. Do you know what that is? Have you heard of Narcotics Anonymous? And I'm able to talk about this amazing fellowship in here, and I'm really proud to do that. Because the truth of the matter is that we are still the best kept secret on the planet. Not everybody has heard of NA, right? And that, it's our responsibility to be, and I got to tell you, I've actually seen some of the best shirts here that have the NA messages on them. And this convention is awesome. You guys are so warm and welcoming. I'm not going to lie. I said to myself, West Virginia. You know what? They probably all have gun racks and chew tobacco. They're going to be mean mugging me. I don't blend, right? So, yeah, but you guys have been so welcoming and just really warm and coming up, and the women coming and introducing themselves to me have been really amazing, and I really appreciate that, because really the biggest part of self-acceptance as another woman is the ability to go up to another woman and give a really sincere hug and say, you know what, you're really beautiful. I'm really happy to meet you, And I took some numbers while I was here. I found some other women in service, And I really want to encourage every woman here to do service, because we have gifts of nurturing qualities and encouragement in here, and we need more of that. So I'm just going to also end by saying, when they say that an addict with 2 days can welcome an addict with 1 day clean, I mean that's what this program is about. And the truth of the matter is that Narcotics Anonymous, if you get a chance to go overseas to any of the conventions, there's actually one going on right now in East Africa and in Tanzania, because I have some friends, and I use social media mostly for Narcotics Anonymous service, because it's the quickest and cheapest way. I can contact people on Facebook Messenger, on WhatsApp. I can get an answer. I could do PR service overseas, and I have. The people from Nepal have asked me to come and do PR workshops over there for these communities that are still starting. And Mountaineer Region, you guys need an alternate delegate. Don't even play. You guys need an AD to step up to do service in here, and you can do it. The truth of the matter is that, service, obviously the group is the most important vehicle, and for people that change their clean dates a lot, obviously the group is what sponsors those members and welcoming them. But getting the message out, doing public relations service, getting those bus posters out. I heard you guys have a drug court system here. We need to get those helpline cards to the drug court, discharge packages, to the prisons in here. There's a lot of work we have to do in here. And, I love convention service, but we need subcommittee service and not so much lip service. Listen, I like to speak, but we need subcommittee service. And the only requirement is to be able to ask for help and ask some of your predecessors. And I'm just going to say, when I did meet Cooper, right, I literally came over to talk to him because I thought he was like kind of mean originally, and I was like, I want to talk to this guy. But Cooper has a lot of information about service. And, part of like the role of the predecessor is just to be able to ask, like, what is your experience? Because anybody can do it. So I've been talking for a while, and I know that, I hope you guys got something out of what I shared, but the steps are the solution, and we have 4 parts of our triangle: God, self, service, and society. Thanks for letting me share.